In today's video, I'm ranking every archetype in the Temporal Forces standard format using Japanese City League results ranging from January 26th to February 19th. Using LimitlessTCG.com's City Leagues page, I'll be ranking the decks based on their first place finishes and sharing at least one deck list for every archetype. Beginning with Future Box, which has one first place finish so far. The first place Future Box deck list we have isn't anything too surprising. It's using Iron Crown EX, which boosts all of your future Pokemon's attacks, the new Miraidon, which can accelerate energy, the new Iron Leaves EX, which is a great counter to Charizard EX since it's Grass type, Iron Hands EX, which we already know is a strong card, Iron Bundle, which is nice for making your opponent switch, the new Iron Treads that can hit for either metal or fighting type weakness, and then a couple of non-future Pokemon, Mew EX, Minior, and Radiant Greninja. Unlike other low-to-the-ground, all-basic archetypes that we've seen success from, like Roaring Moon EX and Miraidon EX, this Future Box archetype actually doesn't have that high of a damage output. It looks like it should have all of the tools to be a strong deck, but I don't think it's quite there yet, and we do have more future cards coming out in future expansions, so this might just not be the final form of Future Box just yet. Also with one first place finish is Arceus Alolan Vulpix with a 1/1 Hisuian Goodra line, and Arceus Alolan Vulpix without the Goodra actually got second place at the very recent Champions League, which was a huge event. So this deck only having one first place at a City League right now, that could change now that players know this deck has the potential to go very far in a major event. Alolan Vulpix V-Star is used for its Snow Mirage attack. This attack's damage is not affected by any effects on your opponent's active Pokemon, and during your opponent's next turn, prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from Pokemon that have an ability. If we think about some of the best decks around, a lot of their attackers are going to have abilities, like Charizard EX, Chien-Pao EX, Gholdengo EX, Lugia V-Star. The rotation might make things a little better for Alolan Vulpix V-Star since Escape Rope is being rotated out of the standard format, and a tool like this Leafy Camo Poncho that we see included in the deck can actually be a lot stronger now because you can attach this to your benched V-Star Pokemon so that your opponent can't boss them up to get around the Alolan Vulpix V-Star after you just used its attack that says it can't be hit by Pokemon with an ability. So you can essentially have your opponent waste turns when they're just not able to hit Alolan Vulpix V-Star, or they'll have to establish a different Pokemon and maybe not even knock it out with that other attacker. And the third deck that we have at one City League first place finish is Arceus V-Star with Armarouge. This has kind of been a rogue deck idea that has seen middling success off and on since Armarouge's release. Armarouge has the ability Fire Off. As often as you like during your turn, you may move a fire energy from one of your benched Pokemon to your active Pokemon. Now, the ways that I see this ability having some potential is that you can chain Sharon's Cares or Professor Tauros, healing your active Pokemon, sending out a new one, and then moving energy from other Pokemon to it. However, in this deck list, I don't see very much use for Armarouge. We have nothing like a Charon's Care or a Professor Tauros scenario that can pick up our Pokemon. However, what we do have is Arceus V-Star that has Trinity Nova that accelerates energy to specifically V Pokemon. So what Armarouge can do is move energy from those V Pokemon to Radiant Charizard, Mew EX, or Iron Leaves EX. Also, on the note of Iron Leaves EX, it feels kind of risky to run it with just 2 grass energy in the deck. I would probably like to see a third grass energy included, just because Iron Leaves EX does need exactly 2 grass to attack. We'll also see the Toedscruel with Slime Mold Colony in this deck list, and I think it's a really strong inclusion potentially because this is going to hurt Chien-Pao. They won't be able to get their energies from discard back to hand. It will also hurt Gholdengo for that same reason, and the Slime Mold Colony actually also shuts off Pokestop, since Pokestop says you discard those cards and then put the items into your hand. So Toedscruel can actually shut down a couple of strong decks. It just really depends how heavy those decks are going to be in your metagame. Moving on to decks with 2 first place finishes, we'll start out with Sandy Shocks and Raging Bull EX. Sandy Shocks is a card we already have in English. It has the ability Magnetic Absorption. Once during your turn, if your opponent has 4 or fewer prize cards remaining, you may attach a basic fighting energy from your discard pile to this Pokemon. I already thought this card had incredible potential. It's not very hard for your opponent to just take 2 prize cards and start off the game that way, and then you can have 1, 2, or even 3 Sandy Shocks EXs that are accelerating energy to themselves with this built-in ability. And it has Earthen Spike that does 200 damage, so if you're hitting into something that's weak to fighting, or even 200 health or below, that's not an awful attack. However, what actually has the potential to unlock Sandy Shocks' potential is the new Raging Bolt EX, which will be in Temporal Forces. Raging Bolt EX has the attack which discards any number of basic energy attached to your Pokemon in play, and then does 70 damage for each energy discarded this way. So with the help of Sandy Shocks EX, and of course Professor Seta's Vitality as your main supporter card for this deck, you can pretty easily string together attacks that are doing 280 or more damage a turn. Next, with 2 first place finishes as well, is Miraidon EX, and we actually have 2 deck lists for this, so we're showing 2 of the 2 first place deck lists, just because they're pretty wildly different from each other. And this first one has a 2/2 line of Regieleki VMAX in it, and it might be a while since you've seen this card in Miraidon decks. Note that Flaffy has rotated, so now we have to do something else with that deck space. Regieleki VMAX has the ability Transistor, your basic lightning Pokemon's attacks, do 30 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon, and it has Max Thunder and Lightning, which does 220, which isn't a great attack, but it is on a 310 HP Pokemon with free retreat. So if your opponent doesn't have anything that can easily one-shot this Regieleki, you can use Max Thunder and Lightning for 220, take a hit, and then retreat to a different Pokemon, and make them have to have a gust effect to bring up that Regieleki VMAX back into the active. So that Transistor ability, if you have 1 of them on the board, that's going to bring your Miraidon EX's Photon Blaster up to 220. It will also bring your Iron Hands EX's Ampu very much up to 150 or 130 if you have a double Turbo Energy attached to it. And with 2 Regieleki VMAXs on the board, it'll bring Photon Blaster up to 280, which is a really good number to be hitting. The second Miraidon EX deck list admittedly won't look too different, but just having that difference of the inclusion of the 2/2 Regieleki VMAX or not, in my book, is a pretty large difference. This deck list is also going to use 2 Energy Sticker, which is a card we got in Pokemon 151 that you might not have even known was a card. Flip a coin if heads, attach a basic energy card from your discard pile to one of your benched Pokemon. Like I mentioned, Flaffy is gone, so we're going to be looking for cards that could potentially replace that energy acceleration, like this Energy Sticker item card. The next archetype with 2 first place finishes is Gardevoir EX. And Gardevoir EX, I talked about this in my Gardevoir focused video recently, but this deck loses a lot to the rotation. We'll see here that this deck chose to include the Gardevoir from Silver Tempest that has Refinement, so it's going to be the exact same ability that the Kirlias have, except on a Pokemon with almost double the HP. This can be important because this Gardevoir can't be knocked out by Moonlight Shuriken, or by Sableye Lost Mine, or even by Iron Hands EX's Ampu very much. What this also means is that you can use Refinement on a Kirlia, and then evolve that Kirlia into this Gardevoir and use Refinement again. This just seems like a neat little way to make up for the loss of the Shining Arcana Gardevoir, although nothing really will, because the Shining Arcana Gardevoir was just leaps and bounds ahead of this Gardevoir. As for the main attackers of the deck, we'll see that it includes 2 Drifloon and 1 Screamtail. Both of these Pokemon are going to be really helped out by HP boosting tools like Bravery Charm and Luxurious Cape and the new Heroes Cape. However, this deck list chose to play a Master Ball instead of the Heroes Cape, which it's definitely a little sus, but The other Gardevoir deck list that got first place, I think he looked even worse than this one, so I went with this one. Another thing I don't like about this deck list, though, is that it's playing Morty's Conviction instead of Cryptomaniac's Deciphering, and Cryptomaniac just seems ridiculous for Gardevoir since you can easily draw into those two cards that you set onto the top. And I also noticed that there's no Arven in this deck list to help you find that Technical Machine evolution early. So there's definitely a few things I don't like about this deck list, but it is one of the Gardevoirs that place first at a City League event. Lastly, for decks with 2 first place finishes is Arceus Goodra V-Star. This time without Alolan Vulpix. Arceus Goodra V-Star. So we're looking at Goodra as the star of the show here. It has the Rolling Iron attack for Water Metal Colorless. It does 200 damage, and then during your opponent's next turn, this Pokemon takes 80 less damage from attacks. It also has the Moisture Star ability. During your turn, you may heal all damage from this Pokemon, but a lot of times you won't get to use that because you need Star Birth from Arceus to actually get set up. Just like Alolan Vulpix, Hisuian Goodra V-Star also benefits from the rotation of Escape Rope, because it makes it harder to get around that Rolling Iron effect. We'll also see that this is using the new Eerie supporter card, or Eri. It lets you look at your opponent's hand and discard 2 item cards you find there. That could even get rid of something like a Prime Catcher that they're going to use to gust your Goodra out of the active position. So that's a really interesting supporter card. We also see them using Misfortune Sisters, so trying to whittle down their resources while hitting them with Goodra's Rolling Iron. Next up, our only archetype with 3 first place finishes is Lost Zone Giratina V-Star. Lost Zone Giratina V-Star also lost some pretty important cards, namely Path to the Peak. Now, without that late game disruption, this deck is going to be looking more into favorably trading and disrupting a little bit still with that Roxanne and Iono, but just mostly trying to favorably trade, maybe even set up a Giratina that after a Roxanne or Iono, the opponent can't one-hit back, even without the Path to the Peak around. So, you know, this deck is pretty low in today's ranking. We still have like another 8 or 10 archetypes to look at. Giratina Lost Zone, while it's not at the very bottom, it's also not at the very top anymore. We'll also see that Iron Leaves EX being included because it's just a great attacker against Charizard EX. Next up with 5 first place finishes is Great Tusk Mill. The new Great Tusk is 140 HP single prize Pokemon with the attack that reads, discard 1 card from the top of your opponent's deck. If you played an Ancient Supporter card from your hand this turn, discard 3 more cards. So as long as you've played a Professor Sata's Vitality or the new Ancient Supporter Explorer's Guidance, you will be milling 4 cards from your opponent's deck. This is also going to use to Counter Catcher to help just trap things in the active, kind of like Snorlax does, but it's also going to be much more built around making sure you use that Ancient Supporter card every turn, and also giving your Pokemon as much HP as possible with 4 Ancient Booster Energy Capsules, 2 Bravery Charms, and 1 of the new Hero's Cape Ace specs. So essentially, you're planning on every Great Tusk to mill 4 cards from your opponent, but if the HP boosting tools or trapping something with a Counter Catcher ever lets you get 8 cards milled out of just 1 Great Tusk, then that's super good. And if you could do that multiple times, that's just so many cards, and you'll end up milling your opponent out, and that's how this deck is winning City League events. Next, with 5 first place finishes, is Roaring Moon EX. Now, Roaring Moon EX unfortunately did lose Galarian Moltres V, which was a pretty big deal for the deck in the later metas of the format. But it did also now gain the non-EX Roaring Moon. The non-EX Roaring Moon has Vengeful Strike for 70, plus 10 more for each ancient card in your discard pile, and also Speedwing that just does a flat 120. So this version of the deck, with Roaring Moon EX as the main attacker, is not going to really be focused on Vengeful Strike doing a ton of damage. It's just going to be your supplemental damage dealer and your best attacker against single prize decks. Next, with 6 first place finishes, is Snorlax Stall. Snorlax Stall lost some good cards, but it also gained some really good cards. With Crabominable V no longer around, Chi UEX from Paldea Evolved is going to be the natural replacement with its Jealousy Singe attack that discards the top 2 cards of your opponent's deck. Now, this is not going to be a main strategy of the deck, but there are going to be matchups where you need to mill your opponent, and just sticking Snorlax in the active isn't enough. So that's why there's just one Chi UEX and a few energies to use it with. With the rotation of Echoing Horn, now we have this Mantine from Astral Radiance in the deck with the Born Ashore attack. Put a basic Pokemon from either player's discard pile onto that player's bench. Now, 99% of the time, Born Ashore is going to be used to put a basic Pokemon from your opponent's discard pile onto their bench. And we also still have Erika's Invitation, which is a very, very important card for this archetype that can grab a Pokemon from your opponent's hand, put it onto their bench, and bring it into the active, all with the effect of just one card. Now, looking at the new cards I mentioned, we have the Eerie Supporter card. Look at your opponent's hand and discard up to 2 item cards you find there. This is going to be a massive card in this format, I feel. Just getting rid of a Switch or a Super Rod or a Pokemon searching card like Ultra Ball or a Prime Catcher to both Gust and Switch. Not only in this archetype, but specifically for this archetype, it is very, very good to get rid of those resources by choice right out of your opponent's hand. We also have the new Hero's Cape, of course, which is going to bring our Snorlax up to 100 HP, or bring our Mimikyu up to 170 HP. That Mimikyu is typically just going to be used if you know your opponent has nothing that can hit it, or nothing that can one-shot it when it has one of our tools on it. So I think Snorlax Stall is going to be a pretty good deck in this upcoming format, maybe even better than it is over in Japan, since they play best of 1, and if you go to time, it's a double game loss. So a little bit different when we're playing best of 3 50 minutes over here. Next, with 7 first places, is Ancient Box, which is a deck that I know a lot of people are excited about. That Baby Roaring Moon is going to be one of the main attackers, but we also have the new Koraidon, a Dragon-type single prizer with the Ancient tag. The Origin Roar attack does 30 damage for each of your Ancient Pokemon in play, and Shred does 130 for 3 energy. Now, we actually can't use Shred in this deck since it does need a fire energy, so this will only be using the Origin Roar attack in this deck, and typically swinging for something like 150 or 180 damage, which is actually pretty good. Also note that these Pokemon can go up to 200 HP because of the Ancient Booster Energy Capsule. We also have the new Flutter Mane, which is going to shut off your opponent's active Pokemon's abilities, which can be great specifically against something like Comfey that will no longer be able to use Flower Selecting, or Chien-Pao, which will no longer be able to use Shivery Chill. And it has an attack doing 90 damage plus 2 damage counters on your opponent's benched Pokemon in any way you like. It's also using one Roaring Moon EX as your big bomb that you need to drop sometimes, Frenzied Gouging to just instantly KO something, or Calamity Storm to do 220 and then leave this monster of a Pokemon in the active position with no damage. This deck's problem is going to probably be that it can be underwhelming in damage output, and so things like that can heal or pick up their Pokemon or reduce damage dealt, and while favorably trading and knocking out a single prizer every turn, those kinds of decks are probably going to be hard to deal with. I'd imagine something like Arceus Goodra is going to be quite an issue for this deck, but it is putting up results, so it's looking like this might be a deck in the upcoming meta. Next, with 9 first place finishes, is Gholdengo, and Gholdengo is typically going to be played alongside of Palkia V-Star. Palkia V-Star is going to be good for its Star Portal, which can accelerate energy to Moonlight Shuriken, but it's also just a pretty good attacker, especially with Miraidon EX decks going from like highest popularity deck to having 2 first place finishes. Palkia V-Star seems like a really good attacker. It can swing 260 damage with Subspace Swell, and like I said, it can accelerate energy either to itself or to Radiant Greninja, or even a little bit to both. Gholdengo EX, however, is the main attacker of this deck. It has the coin bonus ability that allows you to draw 1 card on the bench or 2 cards in the active, and then Make It Rain has essentially an infinite damage cap, based on the amount of basic energies you can discard. So it's kind of similar to Chien-Pao, except Chien-Pao needs the energies on board. Gholdengo needs the energies in your hand. Cryptomaniac's Deciphering is a really good card for this deck because you can just search your deck for any 2 cards, put them on top, and then draw them with coin bonus. So moving from Gholdengo with 9 first place wins, we're now getting into the double digits. Lost Zone Box has 11 first places, but this kind of comes with an asterisk because there are several Lost Zone Box deck variants. We're going to look at 4 different builds of Lost Zone Box here out of the 11 first place deck lists. So this first one is essentially Sablezard, focusing on attacking with Cramorant, Sableye, and Radiant Charizard. It has 2 Manaphy to protect against things like canceling Cologne, turning off the active Manaphy. They can't turn off both at the same time. But unlike other Sablezard deck lists that we've seen in the past, this is actually running 4 Mirage Gate, and also, of course, the Roaring Moon EX, which the Roaring Moon EX isn't too much of a surprise, but the full 4 Mirage Gate, which is seemingly just for Roaring Moon and Radiant Charizard, that's a lot of Mirage Gate. But likely because Raihan has rotated, so now we really need those Mirage Gates. Also running a very high count of Roxanne at 3, using the Crisis Punch, which Cramorant can use for free, and the new Emergency board, which will give your Comfey free retreat. Next, we have a Lost Zone Box list with Raging Bull EX in it, also playing for Professor Seta's Vitality. I'm definitely suspicious of this because it's 4 Colress, 4 Professor Seta's. I wonder how often you're actually playing the specific supporter you want, or, you know, are you seeing Professor Seta's when you want Colress and vice versa, and how helpful it can be even if it's not the specific supporter you wanted. We can accelerate energy from Professor Seta's to Raging Bolt, to Fluttermane, and also to Slitherwing, which can be a pretty good attacker against things that are weak to fighting, like opposing Iron Hands EXs. And then we also have the 4 Mirage Gates, and those can also go to the Iron Hands EX that this deck list includes. So this looks like a bit of a messy one. But the Raging Bull EX is really good at taking 1-hit KOs, so maybe there's something here, but I'm going to assume that this is a little too clunky to see widespread success. The third Lost Zone Box deck list, this one actually looks kind of simple. Also playing 4 Mirage Gate, mostly going to be for the Radiant Greninja and the Iron Leaves EX. Iron Leaves EX is going to be the main way that this is going to try to beat Charizard, but it also does play a Technical Machine de-evolution, which can be really good, specifically against the Pidgeot builds of Charizard EX decks. And lastly, we have a more normal looking deck list with 1 Raikou V, an Iron Hands EX, and a Roaring Moon EX, playing the full 4 Mirage Gate, and playing the Forest Seal Stone since you can use that on the Raikou V. Also having 11 first place City League finishes is Arceus Giratina. This deck is seemingly back from the dead, with Iron Leaves EX being one of its most important new cards, because Iron Leaves EX is really going to help against Charizard. You also have the new Maximum Belt, which allows the Pokemon it's attached to do 50 more damage to EX Pokemon. So you can knock out a Charizard EX with Lost Impact doing 330, knock out another Charizard EX with Iron Leaves because it hits for weakness. And that's 4 of your prize cards right there. So you can clean up by knocking out something like a Lumineon or a Rotom, a Pidgeot EX, or even just 2 single prize Pokemon from there. Like most of the decks in the meta, Charizard Pidgeot loses Battle VIP Pass. But unlike a lot of other decks in the meta, Charizard Pidgeot needs a pretty wide board early. So losing Battle VIP Pass definitely might make this a little harder. However, this list does have the 4 Ultra Ball, 4 Nest Ball, and 4 Buddy Poffin. The downside is Buddy Poffin can't get Rotom V, but it's just fine at getting Pidgeys and Charmanders. We'll see that this deck list uses a Maximum Belt, so this is going to be good in the Mirror Match. It's going to be good against Chi and Pal EX, against Miraidon EX, against an early Iron Hands EX, just helping your Charizard EX hitting that Burning Darkness all the way up to 230, even when your opponent hasn't taken any prize cards yet. Next, with 15 first place finishes, is Lugia V-Star Archeops with the new Cinccino, and this actually won the Champions League. So this doesn't include the Champions League results, but knowing that it is the number 3 most successful deck, actually tied for the 2nd most successful deck in these City League results, and it did so well at a major event, this Lugia Cinccino deck looks like it's a real threat. The new Cinccino has the special round attack that does 70 damage for each special energy card attached to this Pokemon, so that can easily get up to 280 or even higher. Lugia decks seem to be favoring the Master Ball Ace spec, since it's just another way to find an Archeops and discard it, or find your Lugia V-Star on turn 2, because really you just need to get those Archeops in the discard, put them onto the bench with Summoning Star, and then your game is pretty much set from there. Once again, Lugia had 15 first place finishes, and so did our next deck, Chien-Pao. So these are both tied for second place. Chien-Pao and Lugia tied for second place, with Arceus Giratina not too far behind. Just a very, very weird meta we're going into, looking from the current metagame in the West. Looking at what it's going to look like after Temporal Forces and rotation is kind of wild. But we have Chien-Pao tied for second, with most of its normal inclusions: the Baxcalibur, Bibarel, Chien-Pao, Iron Hands, Radiant Greninja. And then this deck list is using the Kyogre with Dynamic Wave. This allows you to do 180 to any of your opponent's Pokemon, and then you put 3 energy back into your hand, which actually isn't a bad thing, because you can just use that next turn with Super Cold. Also playing a Mew EX for a little bit of draw power, and you can also just attach Genome Hacking as well. Cryptomaniac's Deciphering is going to be a great card for this deck, because you can draw into those cards with Concealed Cards, Industrious Incisors, Pokestop, or even the one Mew EX's Restart that's included in this deck list. And the ace spec of choice here is Prime Catcher, which makes a ton of sense with cross switchers rotating. And finally, the deck with the most first places. This has 34 first place finishes, being almost 25% of the first places from these City League events. Charizard Bibarel. Now, also, I want to note, if you combine the Charizard Pidgeot with the Charizard Bibarel, that would be 48 first place finishes, and that would be 33% of the first places. But we do have here Charizard Bibarel with 34 first place wins. Charizard Bibarel just seems like the most strong, coherent, consistent deck available in this format, but it is very early, and Charizard didn't even get first or second at the Champions League, which we'll be looking at Champions League results on this channel shortly. But yeah, this is the most successful deck in the City Leagues so far by a long shot. Charizard EX, of course, very strong, very tanky. Bibarel helping you draw cards, but also doesn't need the extreme setup on turn 1 and turn 2 that the Pidgeot version needs. This is also going to be less susceptible to TM de-evolution, since they'll only be devolving your Charizards, and you know, when they devolve your Bibarel, you could just put it back down. It's not a big deal like Pidgeot is. To wrap up the contents of today's video, I made a quick tier list just depicting the data from the City Leagues. So this is strictly based on first place finishes in City Leagues from the date of January 26th to February 19th. We have, of course, Charizard Bibarel up at the top with 34 first place finishes. We have tier 1 or tier A ranging from 15 to 14 first place finishes. We have tier B ranging from 11 to 6 first place finishes. Tier C ranging from 5 to 3 first place finishes. Then we have tier D with 2 first place finishes, and tier F with 1 first place finish. So note that I'm not saying the tier F decks are overall tier F, but they are the worst out of decks that have 1 first places at City League events. I hope you all enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe and check out ways to support the channel in the description down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time here on Celio's Network.